The Chosen, a 5-minute horror story. It was 2:13 in the morning when Grace woke up. The house was completely silent, not the peaceful kind of silence. This silence felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. Grace sat up in bed and listened. Nothing. Then, knock. She froze. 3 seconds passed. Knock, knock. The sound had come from downstairs. Grace slowly got out of bed. She walked toward the bedroom door, trying not to make a sound. Then she heard something that made her stop. A little girl's voice whispered from the hallway. "Grace!" Grace stared at the door. The voice came again. "Grace, they chose you." She opened the door. The hallway was empty. At the end of it stood a little girl. She wore an old white dress. Her long black hair completely covered her face. Grace couldn't move. The girl slowly raised one finger and pointed toward the stairs. Then she whispered, "Come down." Grace blinked. The girl was gone. Grace turned on every light in the house. Nothing. She checked downstairs. The front door was locked. Every window was closed. But on the kitchen table was something that hadn't been there before. A photograph. Grace picked it up. It showed the house. But the photograph looked incredibly old. On the back, someone had written, "The Chosen, 1998. Grace turned the photograph over again. Her heart stopped. Standing outside the house in the photograph was the same little girl. The same white dress. The same black hair covering her face, and beside her were several people. One of them looked exactly like Grace. Grace dropped the photograph. "No." From upstairs came a loud bang. Grace ran toward the stairs. At the top stood the little girl. This time, she slowly moved her hair away from her face. Grace expected to see a monster. Instead, she saw a pale, frightened face. The girl looked like she was crying. She whispered, "Please don't let them take you." Grace stared at her. "Who?" The girl's eyes suddenly looked toward the ceiling. Something began walking above them. Slow footsteps. Thump, thump, thump. The girl whispered, "The ones who chose you." Then the lights went out. Grace ran. She didn't know where she was going. The house seemed different now. Doors appeared where there had never been doors. The hallway stretched farther and farther. Pictures covered the walls. Grace looked at them as she ran. Every photograph showed someone standing in the same house. Every photograph had the same words underneath, "The Chosen." Then Grace saw the final photograph. It was new. It showed Grace standing exactly where she was standing now, and behind her, something tall was watching. Grace slowly turned around. Nothing. She looked back at the photograph. The figure was closer. She turned around again. Still nothing. Then a voice whispered directly beside her ear, "You finally found us." Grace screamed and ran into the nearest room. She slammed the door shut. Silence. For a moment, everything stopped. Then she noticed writing scratched into the wooden door. "Don't look behind you." Grace covered her mouth. Something was breathing behind her. Slowly, quietly, she shut her eyes. A voice whispered, "Grace." She didn't turn around. The voice continued, "You were chosen because you can see us." Grace's eyes filled with tears. Then the little girl's voice came from the other side of the door. "Grace, run!" The door suddenly flew open. Grace sprinted down the hallway. The little girl stood at the front door. She pointed outside. "Go!" Grace ran toward her. But before Grace could reach the door, the little girl grabbed her hand. For the first time, Grace saw her face clearly. The girl wasn't a ghost. She was terrified. She whispered, "I was chosen too." Behind them, every door in the house opened at once. Hundreds of whispers filled the hallway. "Grace. Grace. Grace!" The little girl pushed Grace through the front door. "Don't come back!" The door slammed shut. Grace stood outside, shaking. The house was completely dark. She looked up at the upstairs window. The little girl was standing there. Grace waved. The girl didn't wave back. Instead, she slowly lifted her hand and pointed behind Grace. Grace turned. Nobody was there. Then she looked back at the window. The little girl had disappeared. The next morning, Grace returned with other people. But the house was gone. There was nothing there, only an empty field. Grace stared at the ground. Something caught her eye. A photograph. She picked it up. It showed the house. It showed the little girl. And it showed Grace standing beside her. On the back was a new message. Grace turned it over. Her hands began shaking. It said, "The Chosen has been found." Grace looked around. Behind her, somewhere in the distance, a little girl whispered, "Grace." Grace froze. Then came another whisper. Closer this time. "We're not finished." Grace slowly turned around. The field was empty, but on the ground behind her were two sets of footprints. One belonged to Grace, the other belonged to a little girl wearing a white dress, and the footprints were slowly appearing, one step at a time, leading straight toward her. The end.